anyway, so we have, and he also killed, what's the other one? Not Archelaus. Oh, he killed another son. I'll tell you who that is in a minute. But it was all because he thought that they were plotting against him, and because his sister Salome was telling him that, because she apparently she and Merimee were in together when they were on top of the hill when they were fighting off the Romans, and she acted like she was Merimee acted like she was so much better than Salome, and she hated her, so she was trying to get rid of her from that point forward. And the saying was, Keith told me last night, so it must be pretty well known. It was safer to be Herod's pig than Herod's son.
Wow. Leave it up to Mr. Keith.
Right. Herod had 10 wives, 14 children, killed 3 of his sons and 1 wife. And supposedly, even after he killed Merimee, he still loved her so much that he preserved her in honey for 7 years.
Oh my God.
I'm telling you, these people are nutty. And he murdered his sister Salome, the one that hated Merimee and got her killed. He murdered his sister Salome's husband Joseph, then his wife's grandfather, and then Salome reported that his wife Merimee had committed adultery with Joseph, and she said to the end that she did not. But what happened was Herod left to go to Rome, and he left Joseph in charge of Merimee and his family, and told him if Herod got killed in Rome, then Joseph was supposed to kill Merimee and her kids. Well, when Herod came back and she was accused of being unfaithful to him, she said, no, and he believed her until she said, and you were going to have me killed if you got killed. So he assumed that she was in close contact with Joseph, so that was the end of her and Joseph. So, thing was, though, she was a Jewish princess, and she gave more credence to Herod being king because she was of the Maccabees, and the Jewish people loved the Maccabees much more than they did the Herodians. And the reason Herod was called great was not that he was such a great guy, it was because of his building programs. He had massive building programs throughout Judea. Buildings, temples. We saw, Miriam isn't here. We went to one when we were in Israel last year. We went to one of his major things, and it was just amazing. Oh, you are here. What was the name of the place we went to?
The Herodian.
Yeah, the Herodian something or other.
That big singular thing that
Right.
killed us to walk up to.
But they were all over Judea. He did all over. And his largest building project was he rebuilt the temple. Here, come over here. He rebuilt the temple in accordance with Solomon's plans. And that made the Jewish people happy because they had a temple again. But, and in the end, Herod got what he deserved in the end. In the end, he was going crazier and crazier, and he tried to commit suicide. He wasn't even successful in that. And soon after that, they've determined now that what he died of was chronic kidney disease, and he had maggots infected. He had maggot-infected gangrene in his genitals. So Herod got what he deserved. And he killed the other one I'm talking about, Antipater, his oldest son. He killed 3 days before he died because he was in line. Antipater was in line to take over as the king. And then Herod found out that there was a plot to poison him by Antipater. And even though Herod had killed Herodias' father and her direct uncle, he still had some affection for her, apparently, and gave her in marriage to Herod Philip, which was his son, and her uncle. And nobody seemed to care, this incestuous family, nobody seems to care. And he was Herod Philip. After Antipater got killed by Herod days before, he was next in line to be king. But then Herod found out days before he died that his mother, who was another Marimay, that's why this is also confusing. It's different woman, same name. He found out that she knew that Antipater was going to try and poison him and didn't tell Herod. But she just got divorced. And it must have been a quick divorce because he died soon thereafter. But she was lucky she didn't get killed. And the son didn't get killed. They just got sent away. Let's see. So, back to Herodias' background. Aristobulus, her father, who got killed by Herod, strangled when she was 7, was married to the daughter of Herod's sister, Salome's daughter. So all this incest and stuff, but when she's 7 or 8, he got strangled. So she still had a mother, Bernice, but she did not have a father. And thereafter, when he changed his will right before his death, and so what he did, with Rome's approval, he divided up Judea into three, it's called tetrarchies, but they're not, tetrarchy is 4, but he divided up into 3. And Antipas got some, Philip, Herodias' husband, got nothing. He only got money. And it's unclear why, it was just one of Herod's, what happened to him. And it would be divided. Herodias got Judea and Samaria, and with Philip II and Antipas sharing the remainders. And also another interesting story about Herod was he knew how much the Jewish people hated him, and he was they're also narcissistic in addition to this incestual behavior. He had all the prominent Jews in Judea taken to Jericho, and when they got there, he put them into a prison, and his order was the day that he died, they were all supposed to be killed, so then people would mourn them, but it would look like they were mourning Herod. Mm-hmm. These plans. And so, but luckily for them, and I never found out why, though I did, the day that he died, they didn't kill these prominent Jewish people, they released them, and so they weren't killed. So, all right, Herodias is now married to her uncle Philip, and they lived in Rome, but he had no prominence. He got money from Herod, but it wasn't what Herodias had anticipated. She thought she was going to be queen, that he was going to be over all Herod the Great's territory, and she was going to be queen, so she was quite disappointed. But he was like, Herodias is compared to Jezebel. She's like the New Testament Jezebel, because they both Jezebel and her were of the royal families. They were married to leaders. They were much more ambitious than their husbands, and both of them would do whatever it took to get to what they wanted. Their husbands were much more passive. And one of the sermons I listened to said that Jezebel was the only person in the Bible they thought was more wicked than Herodias. Mm-hmm. And Herodias and Philip had one daughter, Salome, whose name is like shalom and means peace. Oh, and Herodias' name means Herodias, heroic, or watch over. So, and Antipas, who later becomes her husband, was tetrarch over the areas of Galilee and Perea, and the territories north of Samaria and east of the Jordan River. So most of Jesus' ministry took place in the area that Antipas was the ruler over. So he was very prominent in the life of Jesus. So anyway, okay, Antipas is in Judea, And he's married to a Nabibian princess whose father Artemis is the king of the area that's next to Judea, and it's Jordan. He's king, it's got a different name, but he's king of Jordan and Petra. And so Antipas is married to this, and for political reasons, like everybody got married in those times, so they could be peace between the Jordan area and Judea. But Antipas goes to Rome to visit his brother Philip, and he hooks up with Herodias, and allegedly they fall in love. And some of the things say they truly were in love, but there was a lot more behind their love. And so she was having an adulterous relationship with Antipas while she was still married to Philip, and apparently Philip was just, oh well. So she decided to leave with Salome, leave Rome, and go to Judea with Antipas, because the future looked much brighter with him. It looked like he was going to have much more territory, he had a lot more money, and could possibly be king, so she could then be queen. And once she got to, they weren't married yet, but once she got to Judea, she and Antipas were thinking about ways that the wife, Phasaelus, could have an accident so they could get married and not have issues. But she heard about it, and she fled to her father, and the father waited. He was very upset about this, but he waited, and he gets his vengeance later on. The year after Jesus is crucified, what happened was Artemis took his armies and went after Herod Antipas, and he destroyed all of Herod Antipas and was ready to kill him. But Rome intervened for Antipas, luckily for Antipas, and he survived. But the Jewish people said that it was the reason because Herod Antipas had allowed the beheading of John the Baptist. That was his punishment, that his armies were destroyed. And also later on what happens to him, Herodias. Okay. Also, Agrippa, if you look on your little Herod family tree, Herod Agrippa the first is Herodias's full brother. And Herod of Chalos ends up being Salome's second husband. But Herod Agrippa was in Rome, and he was friends of Caligula before Caligula became the ruler of Rome. And they were having lots of fun together and running up debts and stuff. But unfortunately for Agrippa, he didn't have the backing of the Roman treasury, so he ran up debts, and the creditors were coming after him. So he fled to Judea, and he ended up staying with Herodias and Antipas. And Antipas, they didn't get along. They hated each other. But he stayed there because he didn't have anywhere else to go, and Herodias allowed it. And then Caligula became ruler of Rome, so he went back to Rome because he was Caligula's brother. And Caligula then gave him a bunch of the territory of Judea. And it was looking like maybe Antipas was going to get more. So Agrippa, who had been housed by Antipas and Herodias, tells Caligula that Antipas is a traitor and that he's working against Rome. And Caligula believes him, and he sends Antipas to Gaul. He takes everything, strips his power, takes his money, and sends him to Gaul. And Herodias didn't have to go with him, and based upon her behavior before, you wonder why she did, but she did. And the commentary said a couple of years later they both died. And I couldn't find how they died, but two or three years later, after they were sent away, they both died. And what happened too, part of that was because when Herodias saw that her brother Agrippa was going to get all this property, just like Jezebel, she told Antipas, go to Rome, talk to Caligula, and tell him to give us more property and give you, the title of king, because then I could be queen. Well, he went to Rome, but this was after Agrippa had gotten to Caligula and said he's a traitor. He said, sorry, no kingship, no property, you're getting expelled from Judea. So apparently he blamed Herodias on what happened. So that's the backdrop of all this what's going on. I know it's really difficult because of all these Herods, but if you look at the family, and keep them, because then we go on later to Drusilla and Bernice, who follow in their Herodian family footsteps. But if you look at the notes, you'll see who got, like, five were killed by, the people that have 5 next to them were the people that got killed by Herod. And the Marmite was the one who was the ancestor of the Maccabees, and on. It'll give you a little more. And Salome, you can see where Salome too, she was a dance for the John the Baptist. And this one also, it's hard, a little bit harder to see, but it also has good information and kind of helps you keep all these words straight. All right, so now let's go to the Bible and the actual, and Mark seems to have the most detail. So we're going to Mark 6, starting at verse 14. Mark 6, verse 14. King Herod heard about this. He's talking about Jesus. And King Herod kept, from that time when he was hearing about Jesus, he wanted to meet Jesus. Because he thought maybe Jesus was John the Baptist come back from the dead. He was really scared, but Jesus avoided him, and it wasn't until Jesus' trial he did run into Herod at that point. But until then, Herod kept wanting to see him, but Jesus avoided him. King Herod, and the commentaries say that may have been being sarcastic, because Herod was not a king at that point. He was a tetrarch. But King Herod heard about this, about Jesus, for Jesus' name had become well known. Some were saying John the Baptist has been raised from the dead, and that is why miraculous powers are at work in him, Jesus. Others said he is Elijah, and still others claimed he is a prophet, like one of the prophets of long ago. But when Herod heard this, he said, John, the man I beheaded, has been raised from the dead. For Herod himself had given orders to have John arrested, and he had him bound and put into prison. And the prison was in the same palace area that the dance and the beheading takes place. And apparently Herod, it'll say, maybe it's in this one, it's Matthew. He did this because of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, whom he had married. For John had been saying to Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. And that's in accordance with Deuteronomy. Not Deuteronomy, I'm sorry. Leviticus 18:16 says, thou shalt not uncover the nakedness of thy brother's wife, for it is thy brother's nakedness. And Leviticus 20:21, and if a man shall take his brother's wife, it is an unclean thing. He hath uncovered his brother's nakedness. They shall be childless. And they apparently were childless. I don't know if they really wanted children, but there's no indication that Herodias ever had children with him. So that was what John was preaching, and they told John, just shut up and we'll let you out of prison and you can go on your way, but John wouldn't do that. John was not a compromiser. So Herodias nursed a grudge against John and wanted to kill him, but she was not able to, because Herod feared John and protected him, knowing him to be a righteous and holy man. When Herod heard John, he was greatly puzzled, yet he liked to listen to him. And there was two reasons why Herod didn't kill him. He knew John was a holy, righteous man, and he was also afraid of the people, that if he killed them, that the Jews would rise up against Herod. But he was also afraid, on the other hand, he was also afraid because John was so powerful with the Jewish people that he would lead an uprising against him. But that was never John's mission. John's mission was to preach the gospel. And he would go and talk to John, you know, and that also probably upset Herodias really a lot because she wanted him dead, and then she'd see her husband trotting off to talk to him. And the thing about this is he had so many times to repent and turn to Jesus. He was talking to John a lot. And same thing, she could have gone and talked to him, but she was so angry and bitter, there was no way she would have any kind of feelings that she was gonna go talk to him. So,
Marilyn, just a quick question.
yes,
It's maybe dumb, but I don't know. Was Philip still alive?
yeah, I think so. But he probably had another wife and probably in the family, another niece or nephew in their case, who knows? But yeah, he was still alive. Okay. And he didn't, the commentaries say that Antipas really didn't understand what John was saying, but he was intrigued by it. And if he would have, you know, softened his heart. But he didn't. Finally, the opportune time came. On his birthday, Herod gave a banquet for his high officials and military commanders and the leading men of Galilee. And with the Jewish people, birthdays weren't a big thing. It was just, you know, your birthday. But the Romans made a big deal and big banquets and big parties. It was a big thing, and especially if you were the head person like Herod, you had to have a really big one. And he did this to impress everybody, to show his power and his money, etc. So he's having this big banquet, which was some of them named like boys' night out, you know, drinking and drunkenness. But there seemed to be women there too, because one of the things that some of the commentaries said, and we're going to study her later on, is Joanna, who was the wife of Tirzah, who was a high official of Herod, and they were probably both there, and that's why that they think that they may have reported this to Mark's, that it's the eyewitnesses saw what was going on. So Joanna and Tirzah were probably at this banquet and saw what happened. And so, finally, the opportune time on his birthday gave a banquet for the high officials and the leading men in Galilee. When the daughter of Herodias came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his dinner guests. All right, this is despicable. The word that is used in some of the translations says girl, and the commentators say that girl would indicate she was 12 or less. But some of the others said she was 15 or 16, which is still despicable, but not the same as 12 or less. So it's unclear. She's somewhere between 12 and 15 or 16, and it was clear that it was a very sensuous dance, and it was like a strip dance, and like she had scarves and veils and was stripping off of them, and these drunken men and Herod are going crazy because she's very sensuous dance. And that was Herodias, who was the one that instigated this, and the daughter went along with it, maybe willingly, maybe unwillingly. But Herod and the men were very, very pleased about this. And so the king said to the girl, "Ask for anything you want and I'll give it to you." And he promised her with an oath, "Whatever you ask, I will give you, up to half my kingdom," which was nonsense. He didn't have anything in the kingdom to give. It was the Romans' kingdom. He didn't have, I mean, he could do what he did in the end, but and could have given her money or horses or something or other, but he had no kingdom or land to give her because it was all Rome's land. He didn't own this place. It was Rome's. But, you know, to be the big shot in front of all these guests and stuff, he was like, "Oh, you know, you please me so much." So she went out and said to her mother, "What shall I ask for?" So he must not have planned that, you know, that if you please him and he tells you something, you know, but so the head of John the Baptist, she answered. So she knew her husband. She knew that this was going to intrigue him, and there was some indication that Herod liked Salome, even though it was his niece and his stepdaughter, but just the way the Herodians were. So at once the girl hurried into the king with the request, "I want you to give me right now the head of John the Baptist on a platter." The king was greatly distressed, but because of his oaths and his dinner guests, he did not want to refuse her. And in addition, by Jewish law, Torah law, you weren't supposed to have, just like Jesus got the same treatment, you were not supposed to be able to do anything with a prisoner unless there was a trial. And there had not been, John hadn't even been accused really of anything, and there obviously had been no trial. And also, that you couldn't behead, Jewish people could no beheading. You had to have a trial to make sure they were guilty, and the punishment could not be beheading. But Herod was more concerned about his standing in front of all these people at the
Banquet.
at the banquet and what about the
So how come
Jewish
the
law.
Romans didn't do something about it? How
Who?
come the Romans didn't do something to him about it, because he
They
broke
didn't
their
care. As long as the Jews were under control, he could do whatever he.
law? Oh,
they're-
yeah,
they're-
there was a law about it, they didn't care.
Well, it wasn't the Roman law, it
Oh,
was
it
the
was the
Jewish
Jewish
law,
law.
and
Okay.
they didn't care about Jewish
Oh,
law or
okay.
anything
Yeah,
else.
okay.
It was as long as he kept the Jews under control and there was no rebellion, they could,
Oh, I see.
the Romans were, I mean, if you call it good, were pretty good about that thing, that they let the conquered territories kind of rule, as long as they kept them under control, they could pretty much rule their own areas and own people. But if somebody stepped out of control, then they would take over,
Oh, I see.
so.
Thank you.
Mhm. So he immediately sent an executioner with orders to bring John's head. The man went out, beheaded John in the prison, and brought back his head on a platter. Can you imagine? You're eating and he presented it to the girl, and she gave it to her mother. On hearing this, John's disciples came and took his body and laid it in the tomb. And they went and told Jesus, and that Jesus was very upset. He went off by himself, but he couldn't very long because the crowds kept following him, and so he gave up his personal grief and went and healed the crowds. So, in Luke, we find Antipas is involved in the trial of Jesus. And we hear about Antipas throughout the whole of Jesus thing until it's only the year after Jesus is crucified is when the Nabatean father-in-law goes after and destroys Herod's army. He lets him go for a while and bides his time. Kind of like Absalom did with Amnon. He waited until it was a good time. But he gets involved with the trial of Jesus because Jesus is in front of Pilate, and then Pilate hears it. Oh, and little footnote too. All this thing with the beheading of John took place right before Passover. So this is what the Jewish people got right before their Passover holiday, the death of John the Baptist, who Jesus called the greatest man who'd ever lived. But okay, so Antipas is in Jerusalem during the Passover, and Pilate's doing this thing with Jesus, and then he finds out that Antipas is there, and finds out that he's really Jesus's place of residence is really Antipas's. So he sends him to Antipas because Pilate really doesn't want to condemn Jesus, because in the thing he said, I find no fault in this man. So he wants to take it to somebody else, so he sends it to Antipas. And Antipas wouldn't do anything either. He just sent him back to Pilate. But they'd been big enemies. Antipas and Pilate had been enemies up to that point, and were always trying to get each other. But from that point on, they were best friends because they had the hatred of Jesus. You know, your enemy, the enemy of whatever that saying is, if you have the same enemy, you become friends. And that's what happened with Pilate and Antipas. And one of the questions in all this stuff I looked, what happened to the head of John the Baptist? And one of the things and who knows, commentators said when Herodias got the head, she took a peg and stuck it through his tongue, because it was his tongue that was, preaching against her, and then she buried it in a dung heap. Ooh, Herodias is in a bad place, I'm sure. And also, what happened to Herodias? Like I said, after she sent Antipas to Caligula to try and get the kingship, and he told her, good luck, you're gone. They were sent to Gaul, which was, it was somewhere in Europe, Vienna, Lyons, France, except there was different places that the commentators said. And then after that, they were sent in exile to Spain. And, but died soon thereafter, had nothing. They were stripped of everything. And then, what happened to Salome? She married 3 times apparently. The first one was just to a regular person, and then she divorced him just like Mom, and then married Mom's brother, Herod of Palus. And then the commentator, this is a really interesting story. The commentators said that she went with Herodias and Antipas into exile because she didn't want to be alone. But the others say that she was married and had kids, so who knows? But the interesting story was, while she was in exile with her parents, and it must have been in a colder place, although I guess Lyon and Vienna can get cold, she was walking across a lake of ice, and the ice fell through, and she went down, and only her head was showing, and she was floundering like her dance, and it ended up that the jagged ice cut off her head. Whether it's true or not, it was a fitting ending to lovely Salome.
In Israel that happened?
No, when she was in exile in Lyon or Vienna or Spain or wherever it was, and whether it's true or not, if it's just,
I'm like, it doesn't seem like that area is gonna have ice.
well, Vienna could. Vienna's can get cold.
So Austria.
And France,
Austria, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, France too. So it could have. Who knows? You know, there was lots of information that may or may not be true. You can only go what's actually in the Bible. And the other place, one of the other places that speaks about the beheading of John the Baptist is Matthew 14. And that it was more detailed in Mark, but there was something in here. Oh, that John's disciples came in Matthew 14 in 10, and had John beheaded in the prison, and his head was brought in on a platter and given to the girl who carried it to her mother. John's disciples came and took his body and buried it, and then they went and told Jesus. That wasn't in Mark, that they went and told Jesus. And I'm not sure, I couldn't find out where they had buried his body either. It was in, close to where he was, in Judea or whatever it was. And basically, that's the story of Herodias and Salome. And like I said, it was a year after Jesus was crucified. That's when Herodias, or whatever, of Navidia, is when he sent his armies after Antipas. And that was the beginning of the end of Antipas's ruling as part of the Herodian rulers. So, all right. So, any questions or comments? We have a little bit of time. What can we learn from Jezebel? Oh, I know, that was the other thing I was supposed to tell. When on your outline, when it says life applications and truth-telling can lead to punishment and even death, that's referring to John the Baptist, who told the truth to Herodias and Antipas and got beheaded. You're supposed to fill in B and C, which you think could be a life application. So give me some life applications about this story.
Wouldn't happen today.
All the missionaries that go and tell the Indians about stuff, the ones that got killed and everything, they're telling the truth and they get killed.
Okay, but that's the same, give me another one, life application about the Herodias story. That's an
Well, he said truth telling
yeah, that's an application of truth telling, but give me a B and C, another life application of Herodias.
Keep away from the royalty.
Lead a chaste life, don't violate the Torah or God's law, and teach your kids right.
And being sexuous.
It's all through it. It's all through it. It continues with Drusilla and Bernice. Drusilla and Bernice. Bernice, when we get to Bernice, she was even worse than Herodias in all her affairs and everything. And they would just drop a husband and move on, which didn't seem to be any big deal. And also in the information I found that, and it was in the Roman times during this time, it was actually quite a thing that when you had a big party like this, you would have beheadings for your guests. If somebody danced and, well, not two things. If somebody danced and everything and pleased you, then they got what they wanted. But also that the beheading was, part of the whole deal too. And one of the ancestors of Herodias, I forget which one now, had this big party and had 800 men killed at the party for the people that were there. And before they even executed the 800 men, they brought out the 800 men's wives and children and killed them in front of the men. In front of this party, in front of the men, and then killed the men. It just... And also with the other thing about Salome's dance, this was real. She was a princess. She was a princess, and she was of the royal family, and this was really beneath the royal family and a princess to do this sort of thing. It was usually a slave or a professional dancer. This was common, that they'd have these sensuous dances at these parties, but it was usually a slave or a professional dancer that would be hired, not a royal princess to do it. So it brought them even further down. But they didn't seem to care. It was all about power and money, and if you had to kill people to get there, you did it. It was no
As it
big
is
deal.
today.
Yeah.
Really?
Mary
Really?
waited 7 years before they get everything.
Maryland, not too many years ago, in reality.
They don't
The
care.
hangings.
Oh, women are
Right,
like that.
right. And people would do it, right,
And people would come from,
as entertainment.
yeah.
And not long, well, in the 1800s and early in the 1900s, public hangings, people would go, and watch them. I
didn't have TV.
Right. No internet, no social media, right. You're right. Sin is sin and sin continues, and,
So it's the same.
Oh, and third, I had them, and I don't have the thing with me that I have the third thing on, but, teach your children well. Don't teach them to be evil like you. Well, right, you can teach, raise a child.
God's children, you don't think the Lord teaches us, and I think He does. And look at us, and continually refuse Him. But
think
we're
of-
God's children.
Think of Adam and Eve in the perfect
Yeah.
environment, God, walking with God in the cool of the evening every day, and they sin, they violate Him.
Right.
The millennium, everybody that goes into the millennial kingdom are saved. And Jesus is the ruler, the perfect ruler, the perfect environment, and people rebel. The saved people have children, and like you said, you can't always
You can try
control
to
your
teach them,
children.
but they're not.
You raise them up in the way you should go, and you hope that when they're old, they won't depart from it. And even if they did depart, that they come back to the right thing. But yeah, And, you know, we condemn people like the Israelites, you know, over and over, the grumbling and stuff, and they saw the parting of the Red Sea and the manna coming every day, and grumble, 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 grumble. But look at us. We have the Old Testament, we have the New Testament. We know everything that Jesus did and how he died for us, and we still grumble, 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 and sin. But
And when I was growing up, it was, you know, like the preacher's kids were the worst kids. You know? So,
PKs!
deacons, I mean, and the deacons' kids, you know, they were. Because they felt like, I don't want to be pounded by it and brainwashed by it, and everything, so they rebel. You know, I'm gonna make my own decisions, and that's
Right,
what
and
they
if I
have to
can't
make
have-
their own decisions. But, you know, you can't say that they didn't teach them. You know,
And probably, in all likelihood, probably a lot of them came back after their rebellious period. You're not buying it?
I'm not saying all of them didn't, but a lot of them
Stayed on the
I
back.
mean, look at the famous preacher's sons even now.
Stanley,
Not only Stanley,
Piper, Piper's son. No, he's gone off the deep
Billy
end.
Graham.
Yeah, but they came back.
Right, he did, but he didn't.
Right. And her too, Ruth Graham Lott, she was off the rails. No, Stanley's son has gone totally off the rails. Charles Stanley's son. Andy Stanley, yes. And even now, Steve Swan was telling me Alistair Bay. What is he? Alistair Bay, if you all know, he's a